Welcome to Dominican University of California and the Leadership Lecture Series in partnership with Book Passage. My name is Robin Gale. I'm professor and chair, Department of Counseling Psychology at Dominican University and board member of the Institute for Leadership Studies. This lecture series is a program of Dominican's Institute for Leadership Studies, which is a center for leadership development. Tonight's program welcomes Maria Shriver in conversation with Kelly Corrigan. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Our lead sponsor for the 2017-2018 Leadership Lecture Series is Private Ocean, which is one of the oldest and largest privately held wealth management firms in Marin. Private Ocean has been named 7 times by Worth magazine as one of the top 100 registered investment advisors nationwide, is a 2-time recipient of the prestigious Schwab Impact Awards, and named the best wealth management firm by North Bay Biz. Alain Pinnell is also supporting this evening's program as a diamond sponsor. Founded in 1990, Alain Pinnell Realtors has been the leader in luxury real estate in the San Francisco Bay Area. Dominican University of California's Women Leadership and Philanthropy Council, a giving circle that inspires women to lead, collaborate, and contribute, is a silver sponsor. WLPC is excited to support tonight's program, who are remarkable women and leaders. So on behalf of the university, I would like to express gratitude to Private Ocean, Alain Pinnell, and Women Leadership and Philanthropy Council for their generous support of the Leadership Lecture Series. Joining us this evening to introduce tonight's speaker is Mr. Richard Stone, co-founder and chairman of Private Ocean Wealth Management. Mr. Stone also served for 10 years as a trustee of Dominican University of California. So ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Richard Stone.
I'm honored to welcome our guest this evening, award-winning journalist, activist, and author. Maria Shriver is an influential journalist who currently is a special anchor and correspondent for NBC News. Maria's passion for journalism grew from the back of the plane with the press corps while volunteering for her father's 1972 U.S. vice presidential race. Maria was executive producer for the Alzheimer's Project, for which she earned 2 Emmy Awards, an Academy of Television's Arts and Sciences Award for developing a television show with a conscience. Tonight, Maria will appear in conversation with Kelly Corrigan, who's New York Times selling best author and contributor to NBC show Today and the Oprah magazine. Please join me in welcoming to Dominican University our honored guest, Maria Shriver, in conversation with Kelly Corrigan.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I probably had to leave work early or leave your kids at home by themselves or something to be here. So thank you so much for coming and for your support of this book and support of our conversation.
This #1 New York Times bestseller. It's pretty good. That's pretty good. So my favorite line in this whole book is "Motherhood takes balls."
Yeah. It does.
Yeah, I know.
Big balls, yeah.
Tell us about your mom.
Oh, about my mom. Yeah, well, she had bigger balls than any man I've ever met. She was a champion. She was an extraordinary woman. Started the Special Olympics, grew up in a family of tough, competitive men, and clawed her way to the table and made room at the table for people with intellectual disabilities, for people who were living on the margins, people who were volunteers and coaches. And she, clawed her way up to Capitol Hill and changed all kinds of laws. And what was really savvy about her is that she understood the power structure, and she understood that part of her work was making her brothers look good and giving them credit, and she did that. And she did it really astutely. And there's a new book coming out on her in April, and it's called Eunice, the Kennedy Who Changed the World. And it's an extraordinary book about her work and what she saw and how she fought. and how she really felt that it was a man's world, but she knew how to play the game.
Yeah. Hi, everybody.
Oh, there's just people coming in upstairs. Hi, welcome. Sit down.
What was she like as a mom?
She was tough. She was tough. I have 4 brothers, and she was a character. She dressed in men's clothes. She smoked cigars. She let her hair fly wild. She was constantly, tackling me in football, and up until her 80s, trying to kill you in water polo. She was that kind of person, an avid sailor, and she was a competitor, which is why I think Special Olympics for her, she wanted to show the world that people with intellectual disabilities could be competitors as well. And when the world said that they couldn't, that they could only live in institutions, that they couldn't be educated, that they couldn't run a mile, she'd get in the pool and force them to swim and force her mission and her agenda onto other people. And I think she was like that at home. She would be like, speak up, sit down, leave the room, get going, work on this. And she was chop, chop. She was, her most famous line to me is, I don't want to hear one more yip out of you. And
and you've been yipping ever since.
It's like, I'd be like, well, I just want to, no, I don't want to hear yip out of you. I said, I just think no. So, but I learned a lot from her. Obviously, I learned a lot about sibling loyalty. I learned a lot about mothering. I learned a lot about my faith. I learned a lot about getting stuff done. I learned a lot about persistence.
Where's the overlap between you as a mother and Eunice as a mother?
Well, I think we both made our kids stand up when we walk in the room. So we're both big on that.
Does anyone here do that? Do we all need to start doing that? I think we need to start doing that.
I not only make my kids stand up when I walk in the room, I make all their friends stand up
when
I walk in the room. And it's actually really fun. It's rather enjoyable. But I think we're both big on manners. I think we're both big on sibling loyalty. I think we're really big on family. I'm more touchy-feely than she was. She didn't let me touch her until she was almost dying in her bed. But I think,
my mom too.
I think that's a bit of her generation. And I actually, in becoming her caregiver, I learned a lot about that. I had this, my mother was having strokes and my dad was having Alzheimer's, and I was constantly pushing up against her. I'd hire a nurse and then she'd fire them, and I'd hire another nurse and she'd fire them. I go, Mommy, I'm trying to help you. And she kept pushing back against me. I don't need anybody. I don't want your help, and all those sorts of things. And I was sitting in the back of my church one day, and I had this epiphany to mother my mother in a way that I had wanted to be mothered. And from that moment on, when my mother would say, I hate this nurse that you got for me, I'd say, I hate her too. And I'd say, it must be so hard having a nurse with you when you've been out changing the world and running around, and it must be so hard. And I spoke to her in a gentle way and in a nurturing way, and I, brought her a blanket, and I made sure she was warm, and I tried to do everything that in my mind was a nurturing mother. And as I slowly did that, she softened. And then she would be like, okay, don't fire the nurse. Okay, you're fine, that's all right. And our dynamic changed to the point where she was, in her last months, and I finally got in the bed with her. And I held her hand, and she didn't slap my hand or push it away for the first time in my life. And I think she softened, obviously, with age and as she got sick, but I came to understand that she wasn't raised with somebody putting a blanket over her, so how could she have done that for me? And she was, on the other flip side of that, she was my champion, and she was the first phone call every single time I went on the news. Everything I did, she'd walk around and move my books to the front of bookstores.
Oh my God, my mom did that. My mom did that.
Yeah. And people would say to her, it's so funny, people say, Mrs. Shriver, you can't do, shut up, I'm doing it. They'd be like, wow,
My mom used to put it in front of Susie Orman's book was out the same time that my first book was out, and I always had this idea that Susie Orman's mom would come right behind mine and say, "God damn it!"
I have my kids now send me pictures of them moving books for my
Yeah.
book. Yeah, so that
That's
goes
how
on.
we do it, people.
But there's a thing in the book where I found I was cleaning up my house, and I found a book that my mother had given to me, and I opened it up, and inside it was an inscription from her, and she said, "I can only love," it said, to Maria, "I will only love you more from heaven." And it was a beautiful, I opened the book and I was sitting on the floor and I burst into tears because I knew it to be true. And I'm in really almost daily conversation with my mother, and I know she loves me more from heaven.
And
Yeah.
it's in here. There's a little teeny
Yeah, it's a
image
picture, yeah.
of that note, and you can see her handwriting, and it's
Yeah.
so childlike, actually, her handwriting at that point.
She was, like wild, so everything with her was wild. Her handwriting, her hair, everything was just wild. But she was, like if I think of like a true original, that was her.
Yeah.
She hired people with intellectual disabilities in our home. She ran a camp for people with intellectual disabilities, 100 people in the backyard with 100 volunteers. Yeah, and she wouldn't let us have friends unless they worked for her. And so she was like, if they came over, they got signed up. And their whole family got signed up, and if they didn't show up, they weren't asked back.
That's it.
That was it. They were out. So she was, and I think that was her. She knew that she had to be ferocious, relentless, and
And work with salvation.
well, she worked with whatever she could get her hands on. She just was that kind of a woman. And she was funny because like when I was younger and people would come up and say like, "Oh, you're so beautiful." I'd be like 16 or something. And she'd come right up behind me. She goes, "Your looks are gonna go. Your looks are gonna go." Yeah. She'd be like, "You gotta focus on your brain, focus on your mind. That's what's gonna get you. Your looks are gonna go." And I'd be like, "Whoa, I'm 16 or 17. She's always right there.
You're gonna go next year.
Yeah, it's like but she was always, and I do that differently with my daughters. I'm like, celebrate your looks. They're here because they are gonna go. But not when you're 16 or 17 or 21. But she wasn't, she wasn't somebody that you go to lunch with, you went to the office with. She had a briefcase when I was in lower school, and she'd come pick me up in a convertible with dogs and kids, and she was just like,
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
she's amazing.
yeah, she was amazing. And so she's a great role model. And it was funny because my father was more of the nurturer. He was the one that did the stuff around the house, so it was kind of a flipped model a little bit.
That's interesting. I wonder if that created a flexibility in your assumptions about gender.
No.
No.
No, it created confusion, a massive confusion. So I think it was definitely, she was the one with the pants on.
Yeah.
And even though they were both out there kind of trying to change the world all the time, she was definitely the
Power.
the battle axe in there. So she was that person.
I was trying to say power, but if you want to say battle axe, that's okay.
And ironically, and I wrote this in one of the Shriver reports that I did, is that she didn't feel incredibly powerful because she associated in her generation power with elected office. And when I was speaking to her when she was 80, I said, "Mommy, don't you feel so accomplished? You've gotten whatever, all these honorary degrees. You're the first living woman on a silver dollar. You're this, you're that." And she goes, "I didn't run for office." And I was like, wow. I said, "But you're married 50-something years, you have 5 kids, all of whom get along, you've changed the world for people with intellectual disabilities." And she said, "Yeah, but the power is in elected office." And I don't believe that anymore, but that was...
So did that make you think, well, if I want to be powerful, I got to run for elected office? And did you consider that many times?
I thought about it, but I was more interested in, I got the journalism bug early, and I wanted to make my own way. I think if you grow up in a really competitive family that's, well-known, that's famous, that's very clannish, you either if you want to breathe, you got to get out. And I mean that, if you want to kind of find yourself in a way, you got to get out. And so for me, journalism was a way out. And it was when I traveled on my father's vice presidential campaign, I would sit in the back because all the people who were working with him were in the front. And the people in the back seemed to be having all the fun. The people in the back seemed to be, in their own way, controlling what happened to the people in front. And I took note of that and said, I think I'm going to go to the back. And I think I'm going to play with the people in the front in a different way. And so for me, journalism, because I was always a curious person, it was a way for me to do something different in my family. And I thought it would help me find my own identity, separate from being part of this larger group of people with big teeth and big hair, and so I was, because
I think my teeth are bigger, but whatever.
Are they? They are. Maybe, I don't know. But I was really determined to kind of find my own way, do my own thing, and get as far away from politics as possible.
Yeah.
Then I ended up right back in it.
Speaking of powerful women, tell these guys about Joan Chittister.
Oh, well, Joan Chittister is a great friend of mine. That's good you asked me about her. She's a great friend of mine, and I quote her in this book. And she's a Benedictine nun, has written I don't know how many books, 20-some books. And she's a social justice agent. She's one of the most outspoken women in the Catholic faith. And she has been a motivator, inspiration to me as a Catholic, as someone who's pushed up against parts of the Catholic Church. I'm the only person in my family who wasn't an altar boy. And, but I was educated by the nuns and later by the Jesuits. I'm a theology minor at Georgetown. And so I've always been interested. Both of my parents went to Mass every day until their death. And so it's a big part of my life, but I also have a lot of disagreements with the church. And so she has been she was a good friend of my mother, and she has become a deep friend of mine, and I write in there. I went to, when I got separated, I went to 2 different convents to live for a while, and one was her. And I went and lived in her community and in her convent, and I learned a lot about kind of the community of women, community of nuns. I write in the chapter about what nuns taught me about power and how it helped to change my perception of power. And the book is really a lot about me reevaluating and changing my thought and my thinking from when I was 20, 30, and beyond about these things that we're told. If you go and get a best-selling book and anchor a show, you'll feel successful, you'll feel like you're someone, and how we're kind of buy into the structure of what is success, what is power, who is powerful, what do you have to do to be powerful, to be successful. And I really learned by kind of being in community with nuns how incredibly internally powerful they are. And they make no money, and they're working in our neighborhoods all across this country in social justice in deep ways. And I just love hanging with nuns. I went to the convent when I was young, and I remember the nuns, and they were in habits, and they would say, Wash, I was just a young girl like you, and all of a sudden one day, Jesus came and appeared to me in my room and said, I want you to be a nun. And I was like, wow, really? And then I'd go home and I'm like, don't come in here, please don't come in here. And I was like, please. And I was like, I don't know. I was like, don't come in, please don't appear to me. Because, you had all these stories about, everybody appearing to these kids. I was like, don't come in here. Yeah. But and then I was just like, oh, and my favorite movie was The Sound of Music, and I was really interested. And I thought, I'm Maria, so then I married an Austrian, I got it all mixed up. It was like, and so I was like that. But I find that I'm really, when I've gone to, as I said, when I went to these convents and when I'm in the presence of those women, I feel this incredible calm.
Sure.
And just a total but I can breathe, peace. And I find that with a lot of people, like Thomas Keating, who also is a friend of mine, who's the kind of author of Centering Prayer. He's in a monastery up in Aspen. I went to visit with him. He's 94. And I sit across from people like that who are so wise and so calm and so inspiring. And I just feel like, when I'm in their presence.
Are there any nuns here tonight? Because there's nuns on this campus. Yeah, hi.
Oh. Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So
Really?
maybe if Maria starts to get nervous, maybe you'll come up.
No, that's great. Great.
And you've had a full life of faith. Has it ever wavered?
Yeah, all the time.
All the time.
Yeah, and I think
And was that part of what Joan Chittister taught you? Is that you can be?
No, she didn't teach me that. No, I think if you read anybody who is in religious life or in their faith, most people have struggled with their faith. You read, Mother Teresa now, St. Teresa of Calcutta. If you read her diary, she struggled mightily with her faith. And certainly when I was in college and in high school, I wasn't like focused. I was going to church because I thought I'd go to hell if I didn't. And that's what they told you, by the way. So it wasn't kind of important to me in that way. I was always really fascinated by my grandmother's faith, which seemed to really bolster her when, stuff hit the fan. And also I noticed that both of my parents were bonded in that and how they kind of persevered through their life with their faith. And so I think that in the last, probably 15, 20 years, I think certainly when we started having children, I kind of buckled down into it. And then certainly in the last 10 years, I've relied on it almost exclusively. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What would you change about Catholicism?
Oh, well, God, a lot. I don't want to say that with the nuns in here. I think, I subscribe to a non-judgmental God. I think, I think this Pope has been terrific. I really, really like him. And I think his work on, his social justice work, his voice in that respect, I think just from the first move he took by choosing the name of Francis, I think was a brilliant move. I think the way he's used his voice, the power of his words, from everything from who am I to judge to visiting women in prison to, washing the feet, all of those things I think are send a ripple effect. I think just that really powerful statement, who am I to judge? And I think that was a really powerful thing for women, for gays, for people who had felt excluded from the church and may still feel excluded from the church. And I find myself, my son goes to a Bible group, and I go with him. I kind of bounce around from his service to my own service. But I find, I subscribe to a non-judgmental God and a loving God. And I kind of also have studied Buddhism. I've studied a lot of other, Christianity. And I look at it as all love, and I kind of take it wherever I can go. So I wear, Kuan Yin, I wear Buddha, I wear, wherever I can get it. I wear Mary. My mother was, in a way, a Marian scholar. She did a TV movie called Mary, Mother of Jesus, and she thought Mary was the single most powerful human being and woman in the world. And our house was covered with Mary, statues, portraits. And she really believed that this was someone who didn't get their due in the church, and who was formidable, powerful, forgiving, and worth celebrating. And so she devoted a lot of her life to Mary, and she always felt that women weren't as elevated as they should be in the church. And so I think I have a couple other beefs with the church, and
but it doesn't ruin it for you.
It doesn't ruin it for me. I was talking to my cousin the other day. She goes, "I just get so anxious when I go in the church. I don't want to have anything to do with it." And I'm like, "That's cool." But for me, I find comfort in the church, and
do all four of your kids go to church?
Well, I wouldn't say happily, but they go with me. But they go, but. I don't know if I weren't waking them up and making them go, whether they would go. But my son goes, as I said, to a Bible thing on his own twice a week. And so they've started now going a little bit with him because the minister is hip and young and married and, kind of, I guess, speaks to them better than my pastor does. But I find my pastor very helpful to me in my life, and so I go.
It's incredible to me that when you got separated, you went to live at a nunnery.
Yeah.
That's an incredible instinct, and it does seem like a peaceful place.
Yeah, I went to a cloistered convent.
You must have felt so safe and separated from the noise.
Yeah, I felt...
'Cause it's hard for you, I'm sure, to have privacy.
Yeah, well, I think that, which is what one of my hopes for this book is, that it gives people peace from the noise. I think there's so much noise out there, and everybody's screaming and yelling, and I think we need peace, we need calm, which is why I have a meditation practice, which is why I try to, lead from that place. I wasn't always like that, but I think that particularly if you're living in any kind of public place, and face it, anybody who's working is in a public place, right? And even if you're, a stay-at-home mom, you're still dealing with all kinds of personalities and all kinds of noise and human issues all the time. And I think it's a really valuable thing to have space carved out for you that's your own, that gives you a chance to get below the noise, go under the kind of turbulent water and check in with yourself. What do I think? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Have I changed what I'm thinking? Am I in the right place? Am I in the right relationship? And I think, wherever you can go below the noise, whether it's your bathroom, your bedroom, or a convent, they're all, there for us to access. We have to make a move to do that. But I find visiting, I don't know why, I find visiting convents a peaceful experience.
Yeah. And
I wouldn't recommend you live there, but
yeah.
When I went to the first one, the Reverend Mother there came out to me afterward, and she said, she was looking at me and talking to me, and then she said, I just want you to know, you can't stay here. And she goes, our cutoff is 50, and you're 55. I was like, who told you I'm 55? But by the way, anybody can go, which is what people maybe don't realize, whether it's in monasteries or convents. Anybody can go who wants to write or just spend time in quiet. They're open to people coming and being in community with them, which is a beautiful thing. And so many of these places, it's the monastery at Snowmass or Regina's Loudest, where I went in Connecticut, they're open to the public to make a reservation, and they're packed. They're packed.
Incredible.
Yeah, they're packed with people, whether they go to write or to paint or to just be or to heal. I think, people need spaces to heal. And I'm a big believer in silence. I'm a big fan of Richard Rohr. I go to his retreats. He advocates silence, and he also has a school for contemplatives in action in society. And so...
have you done those 7-day silent retreats?
No. No
way.
No. I'm into the 15 minutes of silence in the morning and 15 in the evening. No. My brothers do, though.
Really?
Yep, they do. My one brother, I have two brothers who go to church every day.
Yeah.
And they both do silent retreats, but I'm not that good yet.
Yeah, it's working for you.
It's
working for you. So you're a special occasion person. You really want people to honor special occasions and do handwritten notes. Do you have a box somewhere in your house of every great handwritten note you've ever been given?
The what? The best?
Of every great handwritten note?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I have, and when we had fires in LA, I grabbed the box and left with the notes.
Yeah. Does everyone here have a box of handwritten notes that they have?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you write handwritten notes? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, I think when you grow up also in a family where people, walk out the door and never come back, right? I think that has a big effect, right? So I think you learn to celebrate this moment. And I think if you're not organizing the celebration, who is, really? And so I, try to have a party for the Super Bowl, I have a party for the Grammys, I have a party for anybody's birthday. If you're coming to town, I'll have a party, And right. I don't mean a big party, I'm not, but just like a celebration. What's your favorite food? Let's have some people over, that's so nice, let's celebrate Kelly, whatever that is. So I'm a big person, most of my friends are in their 20s, and so, which has been a really interesting experience because I think what's true is when you're single at my age, the truth is you don't get invited that much. That's the truth.
That's incredible.
It's true. And so I've started a new tradition, which is working quite well for me. I'm going on date nights with other couples. Since no one's asking me on a date at the moment, I decided to ask other couples for me to go on their date nights. And it's been quite fascinating. And I now find that when I go on the other couples, they want to know about the other couples, and I'm becoming a marriage therapist, and I'm the only single person. And so I find it fascinating. And somebody said when they walked by, "Why are you listening to her? She's not even married." I said, "Because I have all the information now about what works and what doesn't." But so because of that, I actually spend most of my time with my kids and their friends who are creative and innovative and doing cool stuff. And they take me to all kinds of places and do all kinds of stuff with me. And so I feel like I'm in a whole different kind of era of my life because of them. I feel really young. I feel excited. I feel like I have dreams, and I feel lighter. And it probably is because I'm hanging out with 25-year-olds. I don't know.
So if a 25-year-old guy asked you out, would you go?
Oh, God, no. Oh, my God.
No way.
Are you out of your mind? Oh, my God. Oh, my God. That's the other thing about Catholic upbringing, but we won't go there. But no, not a 25-year-old. No, I wouldn't go there. No.
So one of the things you talk about a lot in this book and also in your life is Alzheimer's. And at one point in the book, you say that it affects women more than men.
Right.
And in fact, that right now there are 43 football stadiums full of women who have Alzheimer's. If you could imagine that number.
So, I mean, I think part of my mission, and I talk about, for me, a meaningful life is a life where I have a purpose that's larger than myself, that I have work that's meaningful, that I keep expanding my definition of family, and for me, it's a life of faith. So everybody's definition of a meaningful life, I think, is different. But my purpose and my passion and my drive every day is to try to understand why every 66 seconds a new brain develops Alzheimer's, and why 2/3 of those are women. And the vast majority of women in this country don't know that they're vulnerable to it. In fact, the vast majority of people in this country don't think about their brain health. They don't do things to keep their brains in shape. And they don't understand that Alzheimer's exists in your brain for 20 years before you're symptomatic. And so I have been kind of going research center by research center, by hospital across this country, speaking on this subject, starting funds to research women's brains, to try to understand the hormonal imbalances of women's brains and bodies, to understand the effect of the X chromosome on the brain, to understand how women process inflammation, to understand is Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, and to educate people that their genes are not their destiny, that you can get it even if you don't have an APOE4 gene, and even if you do, you won't get it. And so I try to, as I said, raise money through all kinds of different endeavors, but I feel like I've been successful in first turning the tide and explaining to people, particularly to doctors, which has been really ironic to me, that this is a woman's disease when they told me it wasn't. And explaining it to the Alzheimer's Association that this was a woman's disease when they told me it wasn't. And I think that I say that because when you have a gut on something, go with it. Even though the people who are smarter than you, more experienced than you, tell you it's not so, my experience is 98% of the time it is so. And so I work now with all sorts of hospitals, research centers, funding research on estrogen, funding research on inflammation, funding research on how women's brains process differently. Is hormones effective for cognitive health? Is it not? And really part of my mission is not only to wipe the disease out and help fund a cure or work with people to find a cure, but in the meantime to do all I can to prevent even a year or 2 or 3 years of it affecting a family, because it'll bankrupt a family within 3 months, even a successful family. It's the most expensive disease in our country today. And most importantly, it affects, as I say, 2/3 of all the caregivers in our country today are women, and they have to leave their workplace, which drops them out of, not only their financial earnings, Social Security, et cetera, to care for a loved one with Alzheimer's. So to me, it's a political issue, It's a professional corporate issue. It's a family issue. And the vast chances of people in this room either getting Alzheimer's or ending up at a caregiver are huge.
Yeah.
And so I like that it's kind of a daunting task because it gets me up in the morning, and I like that people tell me it can't be done or that I was wrong because I gets my goat up, and I like to box in that a little bit.
You
So
get a little Eunice in
I get a little Eunice in me, yeah. So I like having a purpose that gets me up and drives me. Yeah.
It's interesting. Your mom picked Special Olympics and intellectual disabilities, and you've picked one thing to kind of go all in on. Do you think that you sort of recommend that as like a way to find deeper satisfaction? Because I have one thing that I do, and I like that. I like holding on to one thing.
Yeah, well, my mother was a big believer in doing one thing, and I haven't been that great on doing one thing. I'm a little more scattered on that. But for me, Alzheimer's actually brings a lot of the things I've worked on full circle. So I worked on Special Olympics and learning about intellectual disabilities in the brain, and 100% of people with Down syndrome end up with Alzheimer's. Oh. So I now, and most people don't know that, I can tell. So I now work with a lot of researchers who started their work as Eunice Kennedy Shriver Fellows. There's a Eunice Kennedy Shriver Center at NIH. I now end up working with a lot of people, and particularly like in the Down syndrome case, even though 100% get it, only 50% of the 100% that get it actually manifest symptoms of Alzheimer's. I find that I did a lot of work. I did a big report on women as the new face of poverty in our country. Women, particularly with dependent children, 44 million working women in this country living paycheck to paycheck. Alzheimer's is an economic issue. So I find my work on poverty and social justice, and I work on behalf of the Sargent Shriver Poverty Law Center in Chicago, which is lawyers. So much of it is in social justice issues. It comes back full circle on that. I look at it as a women's issue on caregiving. My work there comes back. Women who lose their minds, lose their voices, my work there kind of comes back. So I find that this kind of space of the brain and family and caregiving kind of brings a lot of my work full circle. And I approach it as a journalist. I approach it with where are the facts, where are the numbers, where is the data, why aren't we all sharing the data, how do we look at it, and I push up on it as a journalist. Mm-hmm. So it works for me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The most surprising thing in here was to discover that you are not a Democrat anymore.
Yeah.
You're registered, I know.
Yeah, well, that was a long time coming, actually, for me. Obviously, I was raised as a Democrat, and I was raised to think that Republicans were the enemy. And then I married a Republican, and I had a nice, challenging time balancing that in my family. And then I ended up as a Democratic First Lady in a Republican administration. That was tricky. And but what I came to see kind of by being there on the front lines is that they weren't the enemy, that there were good people who called themselves Republicans, and there were good people who called themselves Democrats. And there was a lot of bad things in the Republican Party, and there were a lot of bad things in the Democratic Party. And that they were both beholden to interest groups, that they both had their hands tied behind their back. And then I watched my brother run for supervisor in Los Angeles, and I won't go through it, but I was like, I'm done here. And I'm done with this two-party system. And so I registered what we have here in California as a declined estate, independent. And I'm really, I'm happier as an independent, I think, because I think people right away when they hear you're one or the other, they make a judgment and an assumption. And the truth is a Democrat in the South is very different than a Republican in the West. And we now have someone who is in either, so doesn't even have like whatever. So, so I think that, you know, I think when you say you're an independent or when someone is an independent, it makes you work harder to understand who they are. Where is their mind? What are their beliefs? And I just thought, I think really that the future is in the third party, and it will help both parties. And if you look here in California, the fastest growing party is that of decline to state. I don't like that word, and I'm working with people to try to figure out how to get that on the ballot and change it to independence. But I think that that will help the two-party system. And I think, I think the entire political system is in flux on both parties, right? And I think the good news is I think people are more awake than they ever were. I think from what we were talking about, school walkouts today, March for Our Lives, women running in record numbers, I think people are awake. They're energized. They realize, there are no grown-ups running the show, so we got to get in. And we got to, and I think... So I know people say, well, if you want to win, you have to be a part of this party or that party, and I don't believe that. And I think it'll take a while, but I think it's coming.
How'd it go your first Thanksgiving dinner when you were like, hey guys, what's up? I'm not a Democrat anymore.
No, everybody's really interested in it. I find most people are like, wow, that's interesting. Talk to me about that. And I find that people, want to talk to me in a different way when they find out that I'm, quote, an independent. Yeah. Now, I would say I end up voting Democratic all the time. But, I have voted for a Republican.
Who? Can I ask?
Arnold.
Oh.
Yeah, I did. And when I did, I was going like this. So that told me that R played with my head.
For sure.
And no matter who had the R, and that was a kind of my upbringing, everything I had been indoctrinated against, that I was afraid someone was going to see me, kind of like missing mass. I was afraid someone's going to see me checking. And I was married to the guy, and I was afraid. Right. So I was like, I thought like, oh my God, So I think, I thought to myself, that's not good, because that means I'm not giving anybody a chance. I'm not listening to whoever that person is.
Yeah.
And I didn't like that in myself. And I've worked really hard to try to adjust my judgments, because I found myself to be a judgmental person. And I didn't like myself that way. And so I've done a lot of work to kind of break that down, look at it, change it where I could. And so I think it makes me a more informed voter and a more open-minded person.
It's amazing. You're amazing.
Oh.
You are.
No, but it's an identity thing,
You're truly independent. You're truly an independent thinker.
Yeah, and actually...
you cannot be a Kennedy and not be Democrat. That's incredible to me.
I know. I'm the only one in my family. So I feel kind of bad about it a little bit, but, I think I saw some stuff that just wasn't good.
Yeah. So I'm supposed to let other people ask you questions now.
Okay.
So from the audience, do you miss your career as an investigative reporter?
Well, I still work at NBC. I do about 3 or 4 pieces a month for the Today Show, and they focus primarily on the brain and also on women's issues. So I feel like I still have enough of it in my life. I don't miss, there's parts of me that miss the kind of anchoring a show or doing it every day, but I feel like I've outgrown that part of it. There's more I want to do. There's other things I want to do. And journalism, requires you to be kind of 7 days a week all in. Yeah. And so this works for me well. NBC and I have worked out a good gig that works for me and works for them.
And all those years in that, I would assume, and maybe this is crazy, I would assume that you would be immune from the kind of Me2 stuff that so many people in the media have experienced. Because
well, I think when I started in journalism, there weren't any other women. There were very few women, and it
were
was.
You treated well?
Well, I grew up with all boys, so I walked right in, and so guy talk wasn't offensive to me because I was that's how I grew up. So I don't know what it is, and might have been just the way I held myself, that nobody caused me a problem. Mm-hmm. And they didn't even dare come near me. So that's probably why I don't have a date, but it didn't People don't
Do
come.
you want us to set
people
you
don't
up?
come near me.
Yeah. Are you ready? Are you
No,
ready to
no,
fall in
I
love?
don't know. I don't think so.
Oh, look. It's all of a sudden your tongue tied. Do you think any of your children would run for public office?
I don't
Would
know.
you want them to?
I wouldn't want them to do it if they had little children.
Uh-huh.
I would recommend against that. But I think it's always if you have a passion and you see yourself as being able to make a difference, I think it's a great thing to do. But it is a 24/7 job, and it's really hard on families, and in every respect. And I think, so I would advise them to maybe wait for their children to be in college or out of high school, or at least a little bit older, because you're gone when you're in politics.
And you're never going to do it?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't plan on it.
Okay. I'd like her to, wouldn't you? This is a question about the Me2 movement and whether you believe it's affecting lasting change, that it will affect lasting change, or if it's going to pass.
I think it's going to affect change. I think it already has affected change. And I think the challenge in front of women today is what kind of leaders will we be? Will we exclude men from the table? Will we include men from the table? What values will we put forth? I'm a mother of 2 boys and 2 girls, and I say, you know, to my boys, I want you to make sure that there are women at the table, and women from all walks of life, single mothers, married women, you know, African-American women, Latino women, Asian women. I want that table to be as multifaceted as possible. And I say to my daughters, if you have that table, I think men should be at that table. And because I think they have something to bring to the table. And I don't think, you know, I think if women felt excluded from the table by men, we shouldn't do the same thing, is how I feel about it. And I think that the more we work on these things together, the more we each understand each other's experiences, the more we have the language to communicate. I think that's really, for me, kind of that we haven't listened to the other's experience in this country, because people have such different experiences. And so I think this has been an awakening for many men about the depth of women's pain, the incredible violence of so many experiences. And I think, you know, it's been an eye-opening experience for many women to understand the pain that other women have gone through. So I think that this is an awakened moment, and I think it will continue as long as we lead, I think, from a confident, calm, centered, inclusive space.
I think you're an amazing mother. I have a daughter. Is your son Christopher single?
My son Christopher is single. He's at the University of Michigan having a grand old time, go blue. And Patrick is doing a kind of romance movie, so I think there's a lot of girls running around looking at him. And so, I mean, it's funny when your kids kind of, you know, get out there and kind of, all of a sudden you're like walking behind them and people are, Patrick, you know, you're like, what? How'd that happen?
Right.
But I feel really blessed with our children. They're 4 really good people. You know, they get along with each other. They're kind, and they're funny, and they're incredible company. So I feel like I did something there right so far. So good.
For sure.
I'll probably get on the phone and they'll be like, ah!
Yeah. So far, what has been your most challenging moment, and what coping skills did you find beneficial?
I don't think I have a challenging moment. I feel like I've had quite a few. And I think, I feel like I was challenged as a young girl when both my uncles were shot, and kind of trying to manage what that meant in my family, my own little nuclear family, and then my kind of extended family, trying to understand that. And at a time when, like, a family like mine, we didn't talk about anything. So while the whole world talked about it, it was off the table in my family. So I found that extremely challenging.
How did you find out in both cases that they had been shot?
Well, I was in school when my uncle was shot, and a nun came to the door. and said, there's a car here to pick you up, your uncle's dead. And I never spoke to my parents about it, and they weren't home, and yeah, no. And then my other uncle was shot. I was standing and picked up the phone, and that was that. So I think that, it's a longer subject, but I think, I wrote a book on, my first book was actually a children's book on heaven, and it was questions about grief, and I write quite a bit in here about grief. And I think we are a grief illiterate nation, and I think we need to be able to process grief, because by shoving it down, it comes out in other ways. And I think you have grief when somebody in your family gets shot, someone disappears quickly. I think you lose a job, there's grief. There's all different kinds of grief. And that's been a big issue in my life. And watching my parents and my grandparents deal with it in the way they dealt with it was a bit, was admirable, but didn't work for me. And, like someone's dead and let's throw the football. I was like, wow, that doesn't kind of like, I don't see how that works. And it, you see people go in their rooms and not come out. So I think that there's a lot that we can learn about how to talk about subjects like that. So that was certainly, challenging. I think growing up in a family like mine had a lot of great things, but it was challenging in some ways. And I think certainly when my marriage ended, it leveled me, and that was challenging. And
do you feel recovered?
No.
No.
No. But I'm good, and I think some things you don't recover from. Mm-hmm. I think some things you just go along and you keep, trying to do your work, and you heal and you forgive yourself, and you try to hold your head up and put your shoulders back, which is what I say to my kids all the time, put your head up, shoulders back, and walk forward. And so I do that, but I don't think, some things you never recover from. And, but I'm determined. I am, in a family, and Arnold is in my family, and I have a lot of love and affection for him. And I had a great ride with him. I was with him for 34 years. And we had a hell of a ride. And I'm trying to move forward and do my thing. Yeah. But it's okay. I say to my kids all the time, if you get leveled by something, it's not a sign of weakness. If you're down on your knees, it's not a sign that you're pathetic or a victim or something like that. It can just mean that you loved big, that you felt big, and that's a great thing. And I really do believe that. I think, you can look at everything as a disaster, or you can look at the good that came from it. And I wouldn't change anything. I mean, there's a few things maybe I would change. but I think, I think it's okay to love big, and if it knocks you down, it knocks you down. And I think it's okay, as I write in here about forgiveness, I think we have to begin by forgiving ourselves. We so often rush to, I forgive him, I forgive her, my girlfriend, whatever. And I think for me, I've learned that forgiveness starts with myself. And I turn it onto myself, that to forgive myself, to be compassionate with myself, to be gentle with myself. I wasn't raised like that. And these are some of these things I probably, as I've said along this journey, I probably wouldn't have even published or written had my mother been alive. But I've come to replace a lot of the expectations that I was raised with to a conversation with myself as to what I deserve. And do I deserve to be treated with respect? Do I deserve to be treated with kindness? Do I deserve to get another shot? Do I deserve to dream again? And I think changing that conversation with yourself has been, for me, a learning experience. And I think, you can look at everything as like a drag and like, oh my God, woe me. Or you can pick yourself up and realize you get a chance to do it again or do something differently. And that's a blessing. And so for me, you know, I like where I'm at in my life. You know, I'm proud of myself where I'm at in my life. And, you know, I feel like I'm a blessed person. And I think I'm really deeply grateful for the parents that I have, the brothers I have, the children I have, the husband I had, the experiences I had, the opportunities I've had. And I look forward to having a lot more of them. And so for me, it's been, you know, a hell of a ride.
On behalf of all the 800 people here, I just want to say, like, you are one amazing woman.
Oh, thank you, Kelly.
Really.
Thank you.
Really. I mean, right? Right?
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.